Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Today, we present a double dose of the Debbies on the Garden Basics podcast. First, Master Rosarian Debbie Arrington has tips on what to look for when selecting those bare-looking roses that are hitting the nurseries this winter. Some garden centers will package them in plastic wrap, some nurseries will pot up those Bareroot rose plants in containers, and some nurseries will have plunged those Bareroot roses directly into a bed of sawdust. Debbie Arrington has advice on how to tell if the rose you are selecting is healthy. Then, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, answers a listener's question about a very aggressive weed that's taking over the yard. What is it? How do you control it? Debbie Flower has bermudagrass control techniques. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. It's that time of year. It's winter, and one of the first plants to arrive at nurseries in the wintertime are roses. Here in California, it's early winter. If you live in a colder climate, it'll be late in winter. But those roses will be hitting the nursery shelves and also the shelves at the big home stores as well. How do you pick out what's called a Bareroot rose? And are they really Bareroot? Well, not so much anymore. It depends where you shop. So what are some good basic tips for selecting and planting Bareroot roses? We are talking with Debbie Arrington. She is a master rosarian with the Sacramento Rose Society, also their vice president, also responsible, along with Kathy Morrison, for the daily Sacramento Digs gardening newsletter. But roses, her first love. Interesting, Debbie, that Bareroot roses aren't as Bareroot as they used to be. It seems like more and more nurseries are potting them up for sale.
Yes, because they can make more money that way.
There you go.
Right. And also, when they're potted up already, you don't get a chance to look at the roots. Because one of the things about Bareroot roses is it gives you an opportunity to look at the whole plant. Usually when you go to a nursery, you're only seeing half the plant, what's above ground. But during Bareroot season, you get to evaluate both above and below the soil line. And what goes on underground can be just as important to the plant's overall success as what's above ground.
And there are things you can look for on above the soil level and below the soil level as far as that rose goes, if it is a good rose or not. One of the old options for picking out roses, and it's still around in some of the cut rate stores, if you will, are roses, sticks, basically, roots and all, wrapped up tightly in plastic, and those are still widely available. There aren't too many nurseries or businesses left that are actually plunging their Bareroot roses into a bed of sawdust for you to pull out and examine.
I know, and that's unfortunate because when they were in sawdust, you had a chance to look at the roots. Ideally, when you buy a Bareroot rose or any new rose, if it's potted up or in one of those plastic bags, you want to have at least 3 healthy canes above the soil. It's the same thing below the soil. You want to have 3 healthy roots. And sometimes those roses, particularly the ones that are wrapped up in those plastic bags, will just have one gangly root underneath and hardly anything for the plant to stand on.
If you are buying a packaged rose, you might see a number on the label on the outside of it. It might say number 1, 1.5, or 2, and they are priced accordingly, which I translate to being 1 is the most expensive, 2 is the cheapest. What is the difference between a 1, a 1.5, and a 2 rose?
Well, number 1 rose is a premium rose. Those are roses that have to meet a certain standard for them to get that grade. And the standard is to have what they call flower-ready canes. Those are canes that are going to flower the first year. And on a number 1 rose, it has to have 3 flower-ready canes that will be guaranteed to grow and flower in that first season. A number 1.5, it might have 3 flower-ready canes too, but they might be thinner and not quite as robust as a number 1. It fits the right number of canes, but it doesn't necessarily have the robustness as a number 1 rose. A number 2 rose only has to have 2 flower-ready canes. But also what happens with the number 2 rose quite often is you'll have one that's a flower-ready cane that will flower that year, and the second cane might be kind of funky and not give you very much. And you're really kind of asking for dieback. And a number 3 is a one cane wonder, is basically what number 3 is. The same thing goes for the roots above, below ground as well as those canes above ground. Number 1 has very good root system on it. You're going to have 3 very good roots at least. Number 1.5, you might not have as strong a roots, but you're still going to have something. While a number 2, you might just have 1 or 2 roots down there.
So I think the bottom line is do yourself a favor and just buy number 1 grade roses, because those will give you performance in their first year.
And for many years afterwards, too.
Yes.
The thing about a rose bush is you're buying something that's going to give you at least 10 years of pleasure, and often quite longer. I've got roses in my yard that are more than 25 years old and still produce fantastic roses every year. So putting the investment in on the front end really pays off. Also, those roses that you're buying, they're already 3 years old when it comes to market. Those are plants that have been grown out for quite a while. And so they've had some development. There's been an investment of time and money and a lot of labor put into them. So you're buying a plant that already has had a lot of investment in it. You should go ahead and make a little investment in it yourself.
The thing about the roses, the Bareroot roses, and we're just calling them Bareroot roses, that are already in soil, and they're usually in a pulp pot and ready to be planted. Can that be planted as is, pot and all, or do you need to transplant it, take it out of that pulp pot and transfer it to either a larger container or your garden?
I take it out of the pot pulp. I've tried transplanting inside those pulp pots, and even though they say that they're biodegradable and that they will dissolve in the soil, it takes them about 2 years to do so. And in the meantime, your plant is really suffering because it can't stretch out those roots. The roots on a rose are as long as the canes are tall. So you look at your plant, it's 4 or 5 feet tall. Those roots are going down that way too. And the deeper the roots go, the more drought tolerant and hardy that rose will be, because it's tapping into the water and nutrients all around it. So when you have it inside that pulp planter there, it doesn't have a chance to stretch out. And so it doesn't have that opportunity to tap in to the resources that are all around it. And it's almost always guaranteed in a problem maker, usually with irrigation, because the plant doesn't have a chance to get the water that's right next to it.
The Bareroot roses that are sold as packages, usually a plastic wrap of some sort, those packaged roses might have their canes covered with wax, correct?
Oh, yeah. And that's usually to preserve moisture. Those roses were dug up out of the field probably in September. The ones that come to market here usually were dug in October. But the plastic ones they dig earlier so they can get them to a wider market. And they dip the canes in wax so they can hold in as much moisture as possible. Those plants have been out of the ground for months, and they haven't had any water in that time because they take them to packaging houses soon after they've done that waxing job so they can get them off to their selling points as quickly as possible. So the thing that plant needs is a drink as soon as it gets home.
We'll get to that in a second. Now, about that wax, is it going to degrade on its own, or do you have to somehow scrape it off? And how do you take the wax off a rose cane?
Carefully with an old knife.
Okay. Yeah, and trying to avoid the thorns. The way I look at it is it's like the wax on a bottle of whiskey. Okay, you just carefully come from the bottom, peel it up, and then it will peel right off. Wow, I haven't seen wax on a whiskey bottle in a long time.
You don't buy Maker's Mark, so.
Okay, all right. That's right. Yes, I don't. All right. Is there a way to soak it that might take the wax off?
It probably could. See, the thing is, when the plant when it starts bringing up water through its roots after it's been planted, those canes will start swelling, and the swelling will crack the wax and it will fall off.
Okay, so there is that. There
is that possibility too.
But that's only if you're buying those roses that are wrapped tight in plastic, which, and considering they've been sitting around for 4 months or so, I would think that the first thing you should do when you get those plastic wrapped Bareroot roses home is open up that plastic wrap and stick that whole plant in a bucket of water.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. With those plastic wrap roses, you want to soak the whole plant. And you need a pretty large bucket, usually the bathtub might work better, just so you can soak it in there, because they need to be soaked at least overnight before planting. If you have, if you have the whole plant submerged, so overnight would be fine, but you don't want to drown it where it's under there for days, so now if you have it where it's just the roots, you can put the roots in the bucket of water and you can keep it that way for a week.
All right. But I got to ask, it sounds like you've soaked roses in a bathtub.
Yes, I have.
Okay. That's how you can tell when you're in the house of a Rosarian, if there are roses floating in the bathtub.
That's true. Well, it's funny because, I do flower arranging also, and I soak all the greens and stuff for, before you do arrangements. You have to soak them. But, you have these big pieces of fern or ivy or whatever. It's much easier just to put them in the bathtub.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned that a good quality rose that you might be buying now should have at least 3 strong canes, which would also imply that you better avoid those that have shriveled, brown, or damaged canes.
Yes. You want to look at the canes. They should be green and healthy. Rose canes, they start to get gray and gnarly after about 3 years because they're forming a bark is what they're doing. But that also restricts the flow of nutrients up to where they make their flowers up in the nodes and buds. So you want canes that look healthy and green and smooth and not all cracked and gnarly. The canes should be on a number 1, they should be as big as your finger. Like an index finger. That's a big, strong cane that will really set the plant up well and produce a lot of flowers. Skinnier roses, and we're talking about hybrid teas and floribundas and grandifloras here. Miniature roses do have smaller canes,
right?
Because they're smaller plants. But on the big plants, you want things that have robust finger-sized canes.
For over a year now, I've been making some of the best compost I've ever had in a Smart Pot compost sack. The end result is a beautiful compost called leaf mold, and it's made from fallen oak leaves. And the best part of all, it's easy. With the Smart Pot compost sack, all I'm doing is running over those fallen oak leaves with a mulching mower and then loading those shredded leaves into the 100-gallon Smart Pot compost sack. It's a fabric bag from the folks at Smart Pots that's lightweight yet extremely durable and lasts for years. It can hold 12 cubic feet of pure compost. This rugged fabric is entirely porous, containing many micropores that allows for air circulation and drainage. It has a fitted cover, too. It's a flexible plastic top that's designed to increase heat and help manage moisture in the mix, accelerating the compost process. And all you have to do in the meantime is wait. Load the Smart Pot compost sack in the fall, and the following year, you've got some truly great compost to add to your garden bed. It's really gardener's gold. It's easy to start a compost pile with the Smart Pot compost sack. Open the sack, put it on level ground, and start adding your compostable materials like grass clippings, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, and more, like oak leaves. And you can also add straw or shredded paper. Next, place the optional cover over the sack. That's all there is to it. And if you want even faster results, get a second Smart Pot compost sack and shovel the contents of one into the other, adding a bit of organic fertilizer that has nitrogen. The more often you do that, the quicker you're going to get a finished compost. Smart Pots, they're available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. You can find the location nearest you at their website, smartpots.com/Fred. And when you visit their website at smartpots.com/Fred, you can buy the Smart Pots online. Just visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D, at checkout. It's from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pot's lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers and their latest, the compost sack. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Let's get back to our conversation with Master Rosarian Debbie Arrington. She has more tips for us on choosing Bareroot roses. I would think, too, that if you're looking at a rose in its overall health, you may want to look for buds that are plump and brightly colored on the sides of the canes.
The nodes, yes. On the side of the canes, there's these little crescent-shaped notches. Those are the nodes where leaves and flower stems are going to come from. And roses bloom with terminal buds, which are at the end of those canes and the stems that come from them. So you want to have plants that have a lot of good nodes. If it's starting to push out new growth and you have bud break, you really need to get that plant potted up, or in the ground. And part of that is why so many of the ones in nurseries are already in pots, is because we have warmer weather in the winter. It prompts those roses to send out buds as soon as they're exposed to light and air.
Would it be wise to avoid those Bareroot plants that might have swollen buds at this point and just look for the nodes?
No, it's okay. It depends on what your planting schedule is. You just got to be aware that these guys are ready to pop. So they need to get in the ground. They need some attention.
Most roses are grafted these days, and the union where the rootstock is meeting the scion, if you will, that graft union. What should that look like on a healthy Bareroot rose?
It should look clean. It shouldn't be covered with bark or dirt. The graft looks kind of like a fist. It's up above the roots, and there's about usually 2 to 3 inches between the graft and down where the roots are, because that's where they join the rootstock to the rose on top. The reason they do that is they choose roses that for rootstock that are very aggressive, hardy root systems that can really get a lot of water and nutrients out of the soil and help the overall health of the rose. And in California, most of our roses are grafted onto 2 different roses. It's either Dr. Huey, which is a little red rose that blooms only in the spring, or Forciana, which is a little white rose. Those have very strong, root systems, and they also have very few thorns or prickles on them. And that's another reason they choose them, is lack of prickles makes them much easier to work with.
Yeah.
When you have to graft thousands and thousands of roses, you don't want something super thorny that's constantly, getting into your fingers. So choosing smooth rootstock is beneficial for this very labor-intensive piece of work.
Yeah, so you got to pay attention to that bud union, especially when you're planting the rose, I would think, too. And you talked about how the roots like to sprawl out, so the hole that you would dig to plant a rose would tend to be fairly shallow, but wide.
You need to go at least a foot deep. Yeah. Too. And it needs to be about a foot deep and then 2 feet across and 2 feet deep. So you're taking out about... what is that? 4 cubic feet of soil there.
Okay.
And even deeper than that, probably 18 inches. Because what you want to do is form a cone in the middle of that planting hole that you can set the roots on and spread them out, where they're like sitting on top of a teepee.
How tall should that cone be?
Well, it should be where the plant is sitting. When it's sitting on top of the cone, the graft should be 2 inches above the soil.
All right. So one handy way to figure that out is to lay your shovel handle across the hole, set that new rose plant on that cone in the hole, and the bud union should be above the level of the shovel handle.
Yes, that's an excellent tip. Because you really need to keep that graft above soil. Because what happens if the graft goes down below the soil, it starts competing to produce roots, and the rootstock starts competing to produce shoots, and it will start sending up a lot of canes and overwhelm the plant, because given a chance, that rootstock will take over.
And that is something that a lot of rosarians and rose growers do during the winter if they're pruning back their roses, is look for those shoots that might be coming up that aren't part of the main trunk above the bud union, because that, as you point out, will probably turn out to be a little red rose or a little white rose.
Those are suckers, yeah. And they will overwhelm the plant. The problem with the suckers, because, the Dr. Huey and Fortiana are both cute little roses, but both those plants are really rust magnets. And they get a lot of black spot and other diseases too, because they're not bred for disease resistance. They're very old varieties, and they've been bred and used for rootstock. That's what they're there for. While the new roses that we have, and one of the things that's really great about our new roses is they have high disease resistance. So you don't have your as many fungal diseases at all, and you don't have to spray. They grow very well with beautiful green foliage throughout their season, with very little extra effort. So keeping those suckers at bay helps the overall health of the rose and your rose garden.
Getting back to planting the rose itself, do you cut back the length of the roots?
Yes. Any roots that are damaged, I'll take out. Anything that's bent or broken, and those roses that come in the plastic bags, quite often there'll be a lot of damage to the roots. The overall length of the root, I will cut them back to where they're about the same length as the canes above the ground.
Mm. And as far as supporting that plant with better soil, do you add a different soil mix to that whole, or do you just use the native soil?
Oh, I'll mix in at least 2 or 3 shovels of compost.
All right. But as far as the backfill, it would be mostly native soil. Right.
Yes, mostly native soil. And I've experimented with different things over the years and paid for those experiments. When you mix in a lot of, say, potting mix, that has, or perlite or something like that, to think that you're making the soil fluffier and looser. If you dug out that soil out of clay, what you're doing is creating a flower pot, because what happens is the plant gets trapped in that depression in that pot there and doesn't stretch into the soil around it. It just stays inside that pot. And you also get a lot of water ends up collecting in there, and you can end up getting root rot.
Yeah, exactly. Think of your high school biology class where you learned about osmosis of water flowing from an area of greater concentration to an area of lesser concentration. And that's what that new fluffy soil would be doing, would be attracting water from that heavy clay soil around it.
Yes. Yeah. So you want to add nutrients. That's why I add the compost. And the compost also adds some lightness to the soil. It breaks it up some. And because you need to feed the soil, to feed the roots. And you also need to create some air pockets in there so the roots have some room to grow and move around.
Some people we know like to use horse manure in that mix.
Yes. Yes, horse manure works very well. The thing with horse manure, though, is to make sure it's aged. It's got to be out of the pony for at least 8 weeks. So it has a chance to get rid of some of the excess nitrogen in it, nitric acids and stuff that are in it, but also to get rid of any medications that have been in the horse. One of the things that horses are fed regularly is dewormers. The horse was recently dewormed. Deworm component will go into its manure also, and it will deworm your soil and kill your earthworms. You want to let that leach out of the manure before you use it. So 8 weeks is usually a good cutoff for fresh manure.
So either compost that horse manure or let it sit in a pile for 8 weeks or so. All right.
Yes.
That's a good tip.
No, preferably not next to the windows.
Yes, that too. Or where you walk. Yes.
Yes. Well, and preferably have the stable do it and then get it from the stable.
There you go. When do you fertilize your roses? Do you do it at planting time or do you wait for it to start develop new leaves?
Yes, I wait. Because if you don't want to give too much nitrogen to your plant right away, because it gets cold in January. It can get below freezing, and that can freeze the new growth and cause dieback on the plant. And so you want the plant to mostly concentrate on strong roots and just getting established, getting comfortable. The only fertilizer I give it when I plant it is to give it a couple of shovels of compost or aged manure, because that, it feeds the roots, it feeds the soil, and it also creates a little bit of warmth there too around the soil, around the root system. So they'll be comfortable and they'll start growing, but you're not pushing out a lot of new growth. And then we'll give them some nitrogen probably in late February, when temperatures start warming up. And then I'll start giving them some rose food.
Ask 100 Rosarians, you'll get 100 different answers as far as what sort of fertilizer they might use. So like what you said, perhaps one formulated for roses would be a good compromise.
Mm-hmm. The plants can't tell if it was, lawn fertilizer or rose fertilizer, as long as it doesn't have any chemicals in it to kill weeds.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, try to avoid using lawn fertilizer unless it's straight lawn fertilizer.
Yeah,
because most lawn fertilizer these days has some sort of a weed component in it.
Yeah, and you don't want to expose your roses to that. And usually, what I do with my roses, because I've got a lot of them, I change out the mulch after I prune, and then I put down some compost and then put the new mulch over it. So they get a little bit of extra nitrogen then, and it also helps feed the soil.
Yep.
And then in late February, I'll start throwing around some granular fertilizer. And the thing about rose food is people say, why rose food? Rose food is balanced, but it has a lot of potassium and phosphate. And the phosphate helps form the flowers, and the potassium helps promote roots. And so those are two good things to feed your roses to make sure you have good flowers.
And like you said, having that mulch on top helps keep the feeder roots cool and moist. It conserves moisture in hot weather, helps keep the weeds from gaining a foothold. And as it breaks down, that mulch is feeding the soil as well.
Yeah, and mulch is one of the most important things you can do for your roses, because it does all those things. You want to remove the old leaves when you're pruning from the year before, and when you're planting new roses too. Just be careful about the garden hygiene around your plant, because most fungal diseases lurk in old mulch around the rose bed. Or in fallen leaves around the rose bed. And they're just waiting for the right temperatures. And most of rose diseases are temperature sensitive. So when it gets up there into the 60s and low 70s on beautiful spring days, that's when those fungal diseases will jump back onto the bush and go into action and ruin those pretty new leaves. So if you change out the mulch every year, you're getting rid of most of the bad fungal diseases that will infect your plants. And I prefer to use organic mulches like wood bark or wood chips. I have a lot of oak leaves, and I use a lot of those in my rose garden.
Yeah.
We have a lot of them, and other fall leaves as long as they're disease free. They make good organic mulch, and it feeds the soil while keeping the soil cooler, and it will help that rose through challenging water times as well as challenging temperatures.
One of the things we've learned on the Garden Basics podcast from Debbie Flower is the fact that mulch layer also helps calm a rainstorm, because rain comes down at a terrific force. And if it's falling on bare soil, it can actually compact the soil. But by having that 2-inch layer of mulch, the rain hits the top of the mulch and then slowly dribbles down into the soil so it doesn't compact the soil.
Yes. Mulch does a multitude of great things for your garden. And when you think about it, mulch is what Mother Nature uses in the woods.
Yes.
And what Mother Nature uses to make sure the soil is preserved and the tree roots are protected. And it's like a nice blanket that you put over your garden. I really recommend that people use organic mulch, and by organic I mean something that will break down, like wood chips or straw also works around roses, but it's not always as aesthetically pleasing, instead of rock, because rock absorbs heat and just cooks the roots. And rock and gravel may look aesthetically pleasing in a rose garden, but those roses are suffering. Rock also reflects a lot of heat up on the plant, and it basically cooks the blooms. So avoid rock in your rose garden.
And please avoid weed cloth too, even though it may be permeable, allowing air and water through. The fact of the matter is, it is limiting the amount of moisture that soil can get, and the root zone will tend to stay closer to the surface, which can lead to all sorts of problems. A lot of good tips on choosing roses this time of year and planting them from Debbie Arrington, Master Rosarian, Vice President of the Sacramento Rose Society, and also one of the principals behind the daily newsletter, Sacramento Digs Gardening. Now, even though it is geared towards the Sacramento gardener, there is good gardening information in there every day of the year that she's been publishing this for 5 years. Sac Digs Gardening is the name of the newsletter. And if you just do an internet search of Sacramento Digs Gardening, I would imagine they could find that newsletter fairly easily, and it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe.
The best thing is it's free. Yes. And it should pop up. We're on CaliforniaLocal.com is our host. And you can find us on Facebook every day also. And we put out a daily e-newsletter that pops into your mailbox every day about 4:00. Just subscribe in the upper right-hand corner.
And you get seasonal recipe books too.
Yes, we have recipes every Sunday, and we've published 3, soon to be 4, e-cookbooks, and those are available on the site too. There are literally hundreds of great seasonal recipes.
All right, Debbie Arrington, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Now's the time to plan the what and the where of what you want to plant for the future. And to help you along, it pays to visit your favorite independently owned nursery on a regular basis throughout the fall and winter just to see what's new. And coming soon to that nursery near you is Dave Wilson Nursery's excellent lineup of farmers market favorites, great tasting, healthy fruit and nut varieties. They'll already be potted up and ready to be planted. And we're also talking about a great selection of antioxidant-rich fruits, such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, goji berries, grapes, kiwi, mulberries, gooseberries, figs, and pomegranates. Wholesale grower Dave Wilson Nursery has probably the best lineup of great tasting fruit and nut trees of any grower in the United States. Find out more at their website, davewilson.com. And while you're there, check out all the videos they have on how to plant and grow all their delicious varieties of fruit and nut trees. Plus, at davewilson.com, you can find the nursery nearest you that carries Dave Wilson's plants. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. We're answering your gardening questions here on the Garden Basics Podcast. Debbie Flower is here to help us out. She's seen a lot of garden problems in her time. Oh, the problems she has seen. Horrible weeds, too, just like Jennifer in Fair Oaks, who writes us, Fair Oaks, a suburb of Sacramento, who writes in and says, we have these horrible weeds in our front yard. They are very viney and they run deep. We've tried everything from pulling them out by hand, digging up the dirt. We used weed cloth, which I know you have previously mentioned not to do. And we have even tried Roundup, which I hate to admit, but we are desperate. But they come back quickly and spread at a tremendous rate. Can you give us some advice on how to get rid of these weeds? And Debbie, she sends in a picture of her backyard, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh, you have a bermudagrass lawn. I think that's what she's talking about.
I think that is what she's talking about. Bermudagrass is the bane of our California suburban garden existence.
God, it must be great to be a new gardener and look at bermudagrass and immediately consider it the enemy.
It is tenacious. It has what are called rhizomes and stolons. Rhizomes are stems that grow horizontally underground, and the plant spreads from them at nodes, which is where like leaves are attached. It'll send up a new plant above ground. So there could be this whole string of stems underground with many plants coming above ground, and it sends stolons. Stolons are stems that travel across the surface of the soil. Stolons steal space, and at every node where the leaves arise, roots go down. So those rhizomes underground can be 2 feet deep, and the stolons can go for long, long distances. So it is a very difficult plant to control.
And don't forget the seed heads. If you don't mow your bermudagrass lawn, if that's the case, you will see these little upside down turkey legs growing. Oh, they're cute. Except that's a seed head. And each of those 3 legs has seeds that fly in the wind. And that too can develop into more bermudagrass someplace else in your yard.
Yep. So weeds are that way. They're able to reproduce quickly and in many, many places with many, many ways. So that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Supposedly it headed west in the hooves of cattle pulling the wagon trains.
I didn't know that. I
made that up.
So there, did you really?
No.
So what do? Well, I do a lot of pulling and pull it when I see it, go out after a rain and get as much as I can. I go deeply. You're right. The landscape fabric is not going to help. The Bermuda grass just grows right into it, and it is all that the more anchored into your garden and into that fabric. So don't do that. So continuous pulling, treating. There is one chemical called Teflon ester that is labeled for use to control Bermuda grass. It will not kill it. It will just reduce its vigor. The best time to put it on is in the late summer, early fall, when the Bermuda grass is collecting as much food as it can and sending it to the horizontal stems and the roots to store over the winter, because Bermuda grass declines over the winter, and gives it something to live on over the winter and to regrow the plant in the spring. And so if you put the chemical on in the fall, that chemical gets stored and it has the best effect. It will tell you on the label that you have to apply it repeatedly at intervals. I don't remember the intervals.
4-week intervals.
At 4-week intervals. I've used it one time alone, one season. I did it 2 times at 4-week intervals, one season. I've never done all 4, and I was successful in reducing the vigor of the Bermuda grass, not getting rid of it.
Another thing, too, is it is labeled for use, and this is the part about, read and follow, label directions that we always talk about, but it's kind of important. This product is registered for use in ornamental turf. If you have a lawn, a cool season lawn, for example, and you've got Bermuda grass coming up in it during the summertime, it has better chances of control. Whereas if you read the label entirely, it talks about in other portions of your yard, don't put it anywhere near where you have fruiting or flowering plants, because you just killed them.
It's systemic. It would be absorbed by those plants and cause them, much like the glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, will do as well. It gets in the plant and kills it.
Yeah, one of the active ingredients in Teflon ester is triclopyr, or however you say that, which is a brush killer.
Right. It's a pretty strong chemical. So keep pulling. When I need, let's say, to separate from my other household members and get out of the way, I will go outside and start pulling Bermuda grass. It's so satisfying. If you dig down a little bit, I use a hori. That's a Japanese sort of spading tool, hand tool. And when I see a sprout of Bermuda grass, and I've gotten mine down to a sprout, I dig down and find the thick rhizome and pull that out. That is so satisfying. But prepare to solarize next summer.
Yeah. Solarization is probably the way to go on this one. And we'll have instructions in the show notes on how to solarize. And this is best done. And since you're in the Sacramento area, it's best done in the summertime. And it does a good job.
It does.
Yeah.
Just be careful you don't get too close to the roots of desirable plants when you are solarizing.
Yeah, it helps to do it on a bare area completely. So try that out if you would. All right. So, Jennifer, we hope that helps, and you can get rid of your Bermuda grass. And again, we'll have a link to more information about the Bermuda grass in today's show notes as well. Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome, Fred.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can also find transcripts of most episodes as well. Thank you so much for listening or reading.